Traveling by plane isn't always smooth. As a matter of fact, some people are so terrified of flying that they would give an arm to avoid the whole situation. Anything can happen in the air, really. Apart from finding out that your favorite artist is somehow 2 rows away from you, some other life-altering things could happen. Broken wings, turbulence, missing doors, and fuel leaks, you name it. But the mother of them all, or what most of them result in, remains the hard landing. If you don't know what a hard landing is generally a clumsy or rough landing of an aircraft, but more specifically, it's when a plane hits the ground with a lot of vertical speed and force, like it's diving nose first into the ground. That doesn't sound good. Keep watching to find out about 10 absolutely unbelievable hard landings that airplanes had to pull off. Number 10. A Polish airline plane lands without landing gear. In 2011, a plane managed to land without any landing gear in Poland. While flying, the landing gear had suddenly developed a fault. The wheels couldn't be extracted for landing, and that could have been catastrophic. The plane was a Boeing 767 belonging to the Polish airline LOT. The plane was seen flying circles above the city of Warsaw to make sure that they burnt as much gas as they could to reduce the likelihood of a fire upon landing. The metal bird hit the ground without wheels down, shooting smoke and sparks into the air. A crew rushed to the scene with fire hoses before the situation escalated. All 230 persons aboard were luckily safe. The November day was more than a close call. Number 9. A close call with yet another engine mishap. In 2010, a Qantas Airbus A380 flying from Singapore to Sydney suffered an uncontained failure in its number 2 engine shortly after takeoff. This resulted in extensive damage to the left wing, fuel system, and flight controls, hardly pointing to any good news. The experienced crew did their best to return the aircraft to Singapore with no injuries or casualties, despite the engine with the fatigue crack. What could have been very bad news and an internationally tragic day was saved thanks to skilled hands. Number 8. Thunderstorms and crash landings. On August 2, 2005, Air France Flight 358 was operating from Paris to Toronto. As it approached the Toronto airport amid a terrible thunderstorm, rough winds, and heavy rain, the flight overshot the end of the runway after landing and skidded to a halt in a ravine just outside the airport perimeter. As it roughly hit the runway, the plane rocked side to side as though it intended to topple over due to the turbulence and severe winds. The crew could see fire outside the plane and rushed to begin evacuation. Luckily, there were no deaths, but 12 people had major injuries, with the others suffering minor ones. The aircraft soon burst into flames and was destroyed in a post-crash fire as the 309 crew and passengers evacuated the scene. Number 7. A plane in a volcano. In June of 1982, British Airways Flight 9, referred to as Speedbird 9, was on a flight route from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to Perth, Australia. The aircraft flew into a cloud of volcanic ash, which was thrown up by an eruption of Mount Galunggung in Indonesia. This resulted in the failure of the 4 engines of the plane. The cause of such a terrifying development was not known to the crew or air traffic control. Smoke began to accumulate in the cabin, and passengers noticed an unfamiliar bright blue light around the wings. The aircraft was quickly put through the engine shutdown drill and went into glide mode, cutting off fuel supply and arming the fire extinguishers. The crew calculated that they might not be able to make it to the nearest airport and prepared to ditch in the Indian Ocean near Java. As the plane descended, the engines miraculously restarted, although one engine went out again soon enough. But they were able to land safely in the Jakarta airport. It was only after that the cause of the engine failure was ascertained. Thanks to Speedbird 9, all aircrafts now make it a point to avoid any airspace that could have volcanic ash in it. The ash damages the engines and could give the aircraft an unwanted second skin by coating, causing the plane to become tail-heavy. The last thing a hard landing would need to be even harder would be a plane approaching the cold hard ground tail first. Number 6. Navajo Save. On a nice June 1993 afternoon, a small flight took off from Birmingham, England, heading for Norwich. Aboard the metal seater were 7 passengers, a number that made the 8-seat Piper look spacious. Some 40 miles west of their destination, the air taxi pilot Edward Wire slowly reduced power to initiate descent. Out of nowhere, there was a bang. The Piper Navajo began to shudder like an angry chihuahua, and both engines went off. In fact, the right engine tore itself from its mount and became an aircraft of its own, flying and falling through the sky, and down it went. Thanks to Wire's experience, he navigated what could have been a tragic crash to a successful hard landing. Number 5. Winter Wonderlands and Planes. On December 27, 1991, a Scandinavian airline, Flight 751, was forced to make an emergency nosedive landing in a field near Gatrora, Sweden. The evening before the flight, the aircraft had arrived at the Stockholm-Arlanda airport, coming in from Zurich. The deathly chilly winter had caused the 5,260 pounds of fuel to get so chilled that clear ice had formed on the upper side of the wings, but was not detected. The de-icing crew de-iced with 220 gallons of de-icing fluid, but did not check for remaining chunks of ice. How convenient. Shortly after liftoff, pieces of ice took a brief tour to the fans of the two engines and deformed the fan blades sufficiently enough to disturb the airflow to the compressors. The pilot expertly pitched the aircraft down in a dive before leveling it and switching to glide mode to give it the longest possible distance. They could only find a field in the forest in Gatrora for an emergency landing. Number 4. A one-engine plane over the Pacific. In 2003, a United Airlines Flight 842 was flying from Auckland, New Zealand to Los Angeles. The pilot was forced to shut down one of the plane's two engines after the oil pressure suddenly dropped dramatically. The captain continued to fly with his 255 passengers for almost 4 hours on the Boeing's sole functioning engine over the Great Wide Pacific Ocean. The diversion of one engine became the longest ever single-engine diversion under extended-range twin-engine operation rules. Luckily, the plane made a textbook landing in Kona on Hawaii's Big Island. Number 3. Plane runs out of power. This is something you probably haven't heard before. On August 24, 2001, an Air Transat Flight 236 on an Airbus A330 ran out of fuel while flying over the Atlantic. You might be thinking, that's ridiculous. Don't they know how much fuel they need? Well, they did know how much fuel they needed. What they failed to discover was the fuel leak that caused the trouble. The flight took off from Toronto shortly after midnight and headed for Lisbon, Portugal. Unbeknownst to the pilots, there was a leak in a fuel line to the right engine. About 5 hours into the airbound journey, the pilots noticed a tanking oil temperature and rising oil pressure on the right engine. Despite this being a textbook indication of a fuel leak, they had no cause to think so, and so they wrote it off as a false warning after sharing their findings with their maintenance control center. They decided to transfer some fuel from the left wing tank to the right, which only worsened the situation as it leaked right out. Luckily, it did not disturb those on board as they glided the plane without engine power over a distance of 75 miles to touchdown at a naval base on an island in the Azores, saving all 293 passengers and 12 crew on board. Number 2. An unexpected water landing. In January 2009, a US Airways A320 was flying to Charlotte Douglas from New York, but the universe probably had different plans. Shortly after takeoff, barely even 2 minutes, the metal bird struck a flock of actual birds, Canada geese, and lost power in both engines. That's what the plane got for ramming into distant cousins. Unable to fly back to NYC's LaGuardia Airport or any other airport nearby, the plane was forced to glide into a successful ditching in the Hudson River. All passengers and crew survived, and the incident was rightfully tagged the Miracle of the Hudson. Number 1. A missing plane roof. In 1998, a Boeing 737-297 reached its normal flight altitude after a routine takeoff and ascent. However, it abruptly lost the upper half of its front fuselage, extending from the forewing area to just behind the cockpit. Just after an uneventful takeoff and ascent, the plane reached normal altitude and the incident began with a loud whooshing sound on the left side of the roof. The plane had suffered an explosive decompression as a result as they were traveling from Hilo to Honolulu and consequently tore off a larger bit of roof, bringing the gaping hole to a length of 18.5 feet. Where the roof of the first-class ceiling had once been was clear blue sky. Unfortunately, a flight attendant, 58-year-old Clarabelle Lansing, was swept out of the aircraft while standing. Lansing had been a veteran flight attendant for over 3 decades at the time of the incident. Both Lansing and the roof chunk were never found again. Co-pilot Tompkins had been flying the plane when the roof decided to make a quick stopover. The captain had to take over and steer them back to safety on the closest airport, which was on Maui Island. The crew had performed an emergency landing on Kahului Airport's runway, and upon landing, the evacuation protocols were deployed, and passengers were evicted immediately. Investigators found out that the fuselage had failed because of corrosion damage and improper crack repair. 8 others were seriously injured, and the survivors were very, very lucky that the damage was limited to the roof above the first-class cabin, and the plane did not fall apart into bits mid-air. That would have been another tragic story, entirely different from this one.